comfortably zoned with the Zigzag Man in Alameda, California, pushing on the doors of life marked pull and fighting the unholy trinity as we go. Big business, organized religion, and government.
I am back. You're flying high with me, the Zigzag Man, in Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco, Northern California. And I'm honored to have my godfather, Tony D'Angelo from Connecticut. How are you?
I am fine. How are you, Zig?
Happy Easter to you. This is
Thank you very much.
Easter morning. It should post it by midweek. And, we lost you're Catholic. I'm a Jew boy. We lost a good Catholic. And Joe Garagiola passed away. Personal hero of yours. Just one of the most interesting humans that ever lived. From if he's going to go around the track, he went around the track. This guy, Tony, why don't you take over? Because for me, Joe Garagiola represents a book that he wrote called "Baseball is a Funny Game," and why don't you tell me how it led to that? That was his first book, one of the first baseball books I ever read as a kid, which means one of the first books I ever read as a kid. So, Tony, tell me about how it led up for Joe Garagiola to write that book and what he means in your life.
Well, thank you, and it's an honor to speak with him. When I heard about his passing this week, I knew he wasn't well, and I think we were discussing him maybe a week before he passed on, and the fact that I think for people of my generation or my age group, he represented so many things to us, and for a lot of us, he represented baseball. And here is a man, from what I understand, was an extremely good ball player growing up in St. Louis. There was a kid across the street named Berra who was a good ball player, perhaps not as good. He wasn't as scouted as Joe was. And Joe ended up signing very young with the St. Louis Cardinals, the hometown team, then ended up in the Army playing Army ball, and then as a 20-year-old ended up in the 1946 World Series, which is pretty amazing, and had at least before my time, having to see him, had a good, solid major league career, certainly a career to be proud of, but not a career in capital letters, and bounced around with a couple of teams, and as I understand the story, he was catching, I believe, his last team might have been Chicago, and Stan Musial was coming to bat and looked at him, was crouched behind home plate and said, "When are you going to quit?" And that was his signal to quit and to get into broadcasting. And for so many people, again, of my era, watching him on the Game of the Week, or for a while he was doing the Yankee games here in New York in the mid-'60s when the Yankee team was really pitiful, but, he did keep it interesting. We just learned so much listening to him about so many things involving baseball, what the players were thinking, just the humor and the fact that, yes, he always saw humor in baseball, causing him to write the book, Baseball is a Funny Game. But there's a lot of humorous things in baseball by its nature because it is such an unpredictable game. You don't know what's going to happen. So many things play into it. Lighting, condition of the infield, condition of the weather. And he would always say that regardless, the team that plays the hardest will win, and the team that loses will make the most excuses. But yet there were so many things, and we didn't when we looked at baseball when he was doing the game. There were so many things that we thought were serious that really weren't, and that's what kept us interested in it. And you know, he meant a lot to all of us. We would always we'd play baseball, and a situation would happen, and we'd say one of his sayings. And you know, it was it played out regardless of who was playing the game at what skill level, and he really is a major loss for us all, Zig.
Yeah, you mentioned that you thought he played with the Cubs for his last team. Actually, his last team was the 1954
was the
New
Giants.
York Giants.
Yeah, and there's that whole thing as to if you look at the Willie Mays catch, where Mays is running back, there's a man sitting out looking out of the window of the Polo Grounds clubhouse, which was in center field. And there's this whole story of, is that Joe? And I think more stories than not say that it was Joe. One story I heard is that Joe was in the clubhouse in the back of the room doing something. He heard the crowd. He ran to the window, and then what he really saw of Willie Mays largely was Willie throwing the ball back to the infield after the catch. But the man looks an awful lot like Joe. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah, it looks like him in the window, and he was on that Giant team. He was acquired after September, so he wasn't eligible for the World Series.
For playing, yeah.
Yeah, for playing. But he contributed a little bit down the stretch. They were a very weak-hitting catching staff. They had a very Western Ray Cott.
Yeah.
And he showed a little punch down the end and was a part of that 1954 World Championship. And that was the last time the Giants won a championship in New York, and it took a long time for them to do it in San Francisco.
Well, you'd always have that. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
No, go ahead.
He'd always have that that joke or that banquet line. I mean, you know, Yogi Berra is Yogi Berra, and Yogi Berra is so many things, but yet Yogi Berra would not be Yogi Berra but for Joe Garagiola, who, you know, immortalized him.
Absolutely.
Very similar to what George Plimpton did for Alex Karras, made him a sports celebrity. And people knew he was funny or had unusual characteristics before them, but not to that degree. But the standard...
I hadn't thought about that book for a long time. That was a wonderful book. Much better than his baseball book, George Plimpton's.
Yeah.
He wrote Out of Our League, which I really didn't like. There was something about it that I couldn't identify with. But the football book was really special, and Karras and Lundy and all those. I liked Detroit because they played on Thanksgiving.
They did.
They Milt Plum. They were very, very, very solid. Nick Piazzantre, or can't even remember how to pronounce.
Oh, Pietrasante. Yeah, he was from the valley part of Connecticut, from what I understand.
Right.
And
they were very sad. They had Night Train Lane. Night Train Lane was married to a woman named Dinah Washington, and if you remember Dinah Washington, what a difference a day makes.
Yeah, singer.
And Night Train Lane was a tremendous defensive back in the days of Emlyn Tunnell, who was a great defensive back with our New York Giants. You were a big New York Giant football fan in those days, weren't you?
I followed it, yeah. I mean, that was the whole time of when it was difficult. Exactly, and it was difficult to see games on television, so we went to the radio, and Marty Glickman and Al D. Regattas, who would tell us the play in more or less incredible amounts of detail.
He was so good, Al Dero and Marty Glickman. I'm doing an interview show with Peter Golenbach on a regular basis.
Right.
And we are scheduled to talk about an old acquaintance of his, Marty Glickman, this coming week. So I am incredibly excited. He was World War II Jewish guy in the Olympics, going over to Berlin. I can't wait to find out Mr. Golenbach's take on all of that. And yes, New York Giants. Ali Sherman, the football coach.
Yes.
He'd have a show on that would break things down. Bookie Bolin, the guard. It's just great memories for me. I miss New York. Have you been out to California? Do you have any experience out here? I have a
yes, I do.
Experience. Tell me about it.
It's different. I mean, it's the kind of thing where the California has its own rich sports traditions. Maybe not going back as far as New York, but you go by the L.A. Coliseum, you think of all the things that happen there. You go by Dodger Stadium, you think of all the things that happen there, and it has or the Rose Bowl. I mean, it has more of a newness to it. New York traditions go way back.
Right.
Way back.
Have you ever considered living anywhere else but the East Coast?
Believe me, for a long time I thought of living in California. Never, the pieces never really seemed to fall together. I think on balance where I am now is probably the best place for me because as far as the older I get, I think I'm not as much of a crowds person as I used to be.
Right.
So like if I go to the ball games these days, I go during the day, because I kind of like the space and the distance. But of course, if you go back to old-time baseball, they weren't drawing the crowds then that they draw now. I mean, weeknight games, I can remember the Mets in the 1960s were 15, 16, 17,000 in a stadium that could hold 55.
Right. Right. Tony, if you were to do anything else with your life besides getting into what you're doing now, what would it be? Did you have an interest in music as a kid?
Well, I think for a long time, Zig, I wanted to get involved, and to the extent I still can, and maybe as I get older, I think more of it. Whatever I could do to help people. I've got so many people, at least, that I can see that have so many different needs of all kinds of all kinds of different things, and at times it just makes me very heavy when you think of it, because I know that me, myself, and I can't fix every single one of those things. So yeah, try to fix what I can. Of course, you fix one thing and you think of the 5 things you're not fixing. And,
right.
Which is why I think baseball, in its purest sense, has been such a good thing for me. Because it kind of takes you mentally and emotionally to another level that if there's a baseball game happening somewhere and you're following it and you're interested in it, and you think of while you're there, you think of nothing but the game. You just, at least if you're me, you have a belief that no matter what happens, everything's going to be okay.
Nice. Tony, with me, it's the radio in the background, and now it's MLB Game Day where I can pick up any game on the radio that's being played anywhere.
Yeah.
And sometimes just you're doing what you're doing, you're editing or, just napping, and it's on in the background, and just the chatter of balls, and I'll talk back to the radio. They'll talk about something. I'll say, oh, that was, Joe Grabowski, 1955. whatever. I'm just, I love it. I love it in as background noise if for no other reason.
Oh, yeah. It really is, the music of many of our lives, and I think we've had this discussion before when my first wife was during the time of her final illness, and I was the sole caregiver, and it would be, whatever I would have to do would be many times either getting up late at night or going into the almost the wee hours of the morning, and just I mean, there are people who like to be caregivers, want to be caregivers, get something from being caregivers. That was not me. I mean, I did it because I had to do it, and for me it was a heartbreaking experience. And I'm not ashamed to say it. And there are people who, actually really were blessed by doing it. That was not me. But that said, I would come back into the kitchen, and I would.
You had Joe Garagiola on.
Well, that was it, and he was doing the color. And this is about 2011. He's doing the color of the Arizona games. And of course, then it's like maybe it's 10, 11 o'clock at night out there. For me, it's 2 in the morning. And
right.
To listen to him just chatter on about the game, the same expressions, the same inflections, the same situations, the same stories, I would just sit in the kitchen and I would cry. I would think, I'm 16 years old. I'm back in my father's house and my mother's house watching the game of the week. And again, it's that thing with baseball. If there's a game playing and it's just a familiar theme to you, it's all going to be okay. And that to me was just, it just was so important to me. And I know it almost sounds stupid, but I had people come to me after and they said, during that time and during the first few days when Jean, my wife, had passed on, or the first week, and I would talk about listening to Joe Garagiola, Rich Marazzi, my dear friend, the author and rules consultant, said, when you were talking about Joe Garagiola, I knew you'd be fine. And that's so true, because it got me thinking of something differently than what I was dealing with.
Wow, I'm sorry you had to go through all that.
Well, thank you.
It humanizes baseball in a way that that has to be told, because for me, it's just keeping memories alive of people who I shared baseball with that aren't here anymore.
Yeah.
Grandfather, for instance, who would take me to games, and early on as a kid, and just thinking of that, thinking about being in the grandstand, and he's still here. He's in my head, and Willie's in my head, a kid, not an elderly gentleman, which is a big, a mind fuck. To be honestly, is the best way I can tell you. To be 5 years old and see a 20-year-old Willie Mays come up and literally light up a day in the Polo Grounds. Literally take a game and bring joy to it. And now watch him years later as an old guy, and that's just the passing of time. And one of the reasons I'm glad we do the kind of things we do, we keep the memory alive for people who have no idea what it was like. And
well, yeah, and I think the tragic thing of today's baseball, where baseball is a game of traditions, and it's a game of families and family traditions, and the grandfather, the father, the son. And today's people in baseball either have no recognition of that, or they really don't care. They're trying to figure out where to make the next dollar. And the act of tearing down an old stadium, and you think, well, this stadium is not adequate. It doesn't have luxury boxes. It doesn't have those things that are necessary today. And yet with that, all of the memories and all of the traditions go, and they really don't care. And that's the thing that they really do not care.
I'll give you a great example of that. When I think it was '92, the White Sox first year, I was going across country and we stopped at a game, and it was a new stadium. It was the White Sox stadium. It looked great from the outside. Well, they hadn't yet torn down the old Comiskey Park, and you could see it across the way, and it had a charm to it, even from the outside. And you get into Comiskey, it was a cookie-cutter ballpark that you wonder how they could throw away the tradition of the old park and build this new monstrosity, which is just another Shea Stadium type, equidimension park with no real home to it whatsoever. And they couldn't renovate the old park. They couldn't fix it up. They don't have the technology to do that. They just, or is it all for the glitz, all for the glitter? Just, that was a sad moment. I remember going into that ballpark. Of course, the destruction of both Ebbets Field and the Polo Grounds now it's horrible.
It is.
They're cathedrals. You wouldn't tear down a church. You'd fix it up. That kind of thing. You'd renovate it. And these are cathedrals. And again, we've probably said this on the air. I know together, to take a team from a kid who, a child, a boy, a girl, who grows up following a team, and they get to it, and they whatever age they get to, you take the team out of the city, it's just not right. The sports have a responsibility to the fans that they cultivate, and whatever it takes, it should be eminent domain. And the Dodgers should be the Brooklyn Dodgers. The Giants should be if they wanted to move, if they wanted to get a team in San Francisco, well, expansion came very soon after that. They could have waited so that's my soapbox thing. It doesn't have to be Easter. I could talk about it this any day. Go ahead, Tony. I interrupt.
Oh no, and that's really the sad thing, because so many of it. And I had this discussion with my wife last night, and I said, this really was a rough week. We lost Joe Garagiola, and then in the same day we lost Ken Howard. Fine actor.
The fine actor and a unionist, as a matter of fact, and pretty good ball player. Well, he played the White Shadow, and
exactly.
You could see that he wasn't just some guy. They had him. I don't know how many takes it took to make it, but the guy was very well coordinated and a good actor, and a show that was kind of ahead of its time in a lot of ways. Tell me about your show that you guys do. You do two shows. One of them is sports with Bob Lazari, you and Bob have been on this show together, and that was fun. That was a kick. That was I really enjoy your company. But you do a show that isn't, and this is what I try to do with my show, not all sports. Tell me about the show that's not.
Well, it's called Coast to Coast, and I try to mix it up with, guests from entertainment or current affairs or music. And we talk about a lot of different things, and I think that like for some reason, at least in my life, And when you think of Joe's passing, it really makes you very sensitive to the fact that a lot of your sports life and your personal life and your music life and your scholastic life or your work life, it all kind of runs together. And, you know, I can tell you, like, what songs were playing on WABC Music Radio 77 when the Mets were playing in 69 or the Mets were playing in 71, because I can remember what was playing on the radio on the way to the park and back. You know,
can remember that Cousin Brucey was the guy who told you what was playing, too.
Yes, he did.
Right? Oh, yeah, me too. I remember it like 1965, because there was a draft going on and I was about to be, I enlisted in the Air Force. I remember every song from Hang On, Sloopy. Anytime a song comes on from 1965, I remember that. Yeah, those few months, the months before going in, just listening to music, thinking, what's ahead of me? What is going on? Where is Vietnam? What is, what's this all about? What the craziness as a, 18, 19-year-old kid? It tore us all apart. Music kept us all together. Eve of Destruction.
Yeah.
Those songs. Dylan was coming out. Phil Oakes. We just gotta. It chronicled our age in every way. Music has done that, and it. I can't say enough about American jazz and how the black people are responsible for that, and all the inequities that go around it, and marijuana and all of that stuff. There's music in the background playing. That's why I like the movie Forrest Gump so much. It's just so well orchestrated with songs that take you through the entire era. Have I rambled enough, Tony?
You never ramble enough for me.
It's early morning. It's 8 o'clock in the morning in California. I don't know. I have a big day ahead of me. It'll be a challenge. Who was your last guest on your show? Your last music?
I had two sports people. One of whom, very interesting fella. His name was Tokyo Rosenthal, and this is an interesting thing. He was taking pictures at Yankee Stadium during the 70s under an assumed press credential, and they let him in year after year after year after year after year, and he's got some incredible pictures of, like, Billy Martin and Ron Guidry and Reggie Jackson and Thurman Munson and all of the Yankees, and it's quite a story. He's assembled an ebook with a lot of these pictures. And another one we had actually was another sports guest, Evan Weiner, whom we both know, who was pretty much, I mean, I always say to Bob Lazari that, we're pretty cynical sports fans, or pretty critical sports fans of what's going on. But, Evan, with a lot more fact than, I might personally have, is much more acutely critical than I would be as far as, the condition of whatever you want to call it, sports and politics today, which seem to wind themselves together even more so, and every minute they seem to get closer as the days pass on.
Sports is a conservative business. I find the people that play sports, the people that manage sports, pretty conservative. And I don't know, I think any steps that they make, any progression that they make, comes very, very slow. Very, very slow to change things that should have been changed a long time. And then you get the people with money that are just nuts, like Jimmy Jones. is it Jimmy Jones, the owner of
Jerry Jones?
Jerry Jones comes
Jerry
out
Jones.
the other day and says, one of the most inane things I ever heard. I stopped really being a football fan when they had a cart, out there 24/7. In other words, they expected violence and somebody to be carried off. And I realized this is getting crazy, the Darryl Stingley years. Well, I wasn't far off in my assessment. It is overly violent. You have 30-year-old men walking around, not knowing where they live, what town, what time it is.
I've interviewed so many of them too, and it's really true.
Right, and it's tragic. So Jerry Jones comes out after the NFL. There's been about 5 years now of really looking into this head injury thing, trying to revise the helmets, trying to take responsibility, trying to get like this class action thing where guys are being taken care of who really need it, and people are donating their brains to science to assure us all that yes, indeed, these violences, Ken Stabler, all this stuff, it causes horrible things. And if it wasn't Parkinson's disease with Ali, Parkinson's syndrome, this, that, and the other thing, hey, you get smacked around in your head over and over and over again. Practice and this, that, no. Since you're 16 years old and Pop Warner, it's going to take its toll. So Jerry Jones, if he didn't have money, would anybody give him a microphone to talk in front of?
That's the case with so many, though.
There's so many of them. But he typified because he had his little accent going on, his Texas thing, which you could be talking nuclear physics in a Texas accent. You sound like a fucking moron. Hi, he says. He comes on the radio, and he says, I decided that all these studies, I think, it didn't happen, doesn't happen. It's purely overrated no matter what the studies show, and I'm against it. What the fuck? You own a major franchise. You're responsible for all this, and he comes out with this. It makes me think, what are sports about? What is he trying to save some money just in case there's more of a lawsuit? I'm against it. So anyway, that's. I'm sorry.
Well,
I go on. What were you saying, Tony?
Oh no, it just goes to show you what a different world it is, and that it's well, and you take it back to Joe, like watching the game of the week and the baseball world of Joe Garagiola, and how every week
it was
there was
simple. It was
character,
world.
yeah, and humor. And just the thing of what actually goes on at ball games. Like one of my favorite baseball world of Joe Garagiola's, and you and I have talked about it, but I'm sure a lot of the people listening are either too young or they've forgotten, was in the mid-1970s in County Stadium, Joey J. and Bob Buell, who by then were retired pitchers, they were former Milwaukee Braves, were going through their routine in the County Stadium bleachers with Joe as to what they would do on their days off from pitching. They would dress up as construction workers. And they weren't big men, so they weren't going to draw any attention. They had sunglasses and fishing hats and lunch pails. And they'd go out, and one of them would have a set of binoculars. They'd go out into the bleachers. And one of them would have a program with aluminum foil. And one would look at the catcher, and, the sign is a curve. The program would go up. It's a fastball. The program would go down. And, Joe was just like laughing. He's saying, folks, this is what happens in Major League Baseball. People seal signs in the most ridiculous of ways. And, it was it was so funny to watch them do it. And, they had walked out and nobody's paying them any mind. And
right.
That's
so I got to tell you about Joey J and Bob Buell playing on the 1958 Milwaukee Braves. That, if you have to take any team that we grew up watching, was about as deep, solid, and great as any baseball team ever.
Yeah.
That I love that team because the Giants had just left. I was floundering. I rooted for the Braves in the '57 World Series as a 10-year-old kid because I was a National League guy and the Giants were losing. And I really rooted for the Braves in '58. And I just got to pay homage to them every now and again. Adcock, Torrey, Shandling, Logan, all those guys, along with Matthews and Aaron and Warren Spahn. It's just a tremendous team. And whenever I think of those guys, I think, first of all, Joey J, if I'm not mistaken, was the first Little Leaguer to ever make the major leagues.
I think you're right, yeah.
Yeah, so just to tell you that there's a lot of trivia that's in this brain. If there's nothing else, just a lot of baseball trivia, and those are great names. But it's a great story, and it brings to mind also that Joe Garagiola was in the same window that the '51 Giants were accused of stealing signs.
Yes.
Down the stretch. It was Herman Franks and Sal Evars, and they'd have a buzzer system set up.
The buzzer and the binoculars, yeah.
Right, the same exact way. And to be perfectly frank, it was done before, that kind of stuff. But a book came out in the mid '90s, Cathedral Greens, by a very prominent writer with the Wall Street Journal, and it basically said that the Giants, in that miracle comeback, they were getting signs. They were indeed stealing signs. Some players used them. Some players didn't for one reason or another. Bobby Thompson was one that would take advantage of it from time to time, and there was pretty conclusive evidence that he knew what was coming. That pitch from Ralph Branca in 1951. The shot heard round the world. Now, you say it was going on all the time. You still had to hit the ball. You still had to make contact, this, that, and the other thing. A big deal was made of it, and looking back, kind of shocked me as a Giants fan when I read it. I read the book twice, and it took me aback. It made me think, but what can I tell you? Life is life. It isn't the fairy tale we think it is when we grow up. And there's a lot that comes into it. And it's not just that. In politics, Nixon and Kennedy and it's all been kind of disappointments, let's say. The big Camelot in the sky is with us. So we just, as you say, we just try to help as many people as we can, try to help ourselves, keep our cup filled so we could fill others. Mm-hmm. And what do you do when you're not doing TV? In between, you got a day job. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I do, and that's the one that pays, or as far as has the potential of paying most of the bills. And I work as a trust officer in New Haven, Connecticut. And it's an interesting business. I think it's the kind of thing that, as time goes on, it may not be as prevalent as it once was for, any number of reasons. But, it's I like it because it has places where if I have any gray matter, I could use it. And, it involves personal contact, which I like.
What are the things you do in your day job that make you more skilled in the TV thing?
Well, that's an excellent question. I'd like to think I ask better questions. if I'm if I'm working with someone and I'm trying to figure out how something's working, I try to ask good questions to bring out what it is we need to be concentrating on, and I like to think that has helped me be a better interviewer. And it's basically the same thing. It's making someone comfortable, gaining their trust, and not abusing their trust.
Communications, and I think in whatever job you have, it's personal communications, and they all transcend to whatever it is that you're doing. Where did you learn those skills initially?
Oh, many years ago, believe it or not, in Philadelphia. This is back during the days of the great Philly teams, which was a very interesting time to be in Philadelphia, because it was. I never really realized, being in a one-team town, how much attention they get, and really how either loved or hated they are, depending on how well they're doing. They are by the people that are there. And what amazed me there was Tug McGraw actually became more or less the favorite son of Philadelphia. And he was leading these huge rallies in downtown Philadelphia, beginning at Fairmount Park, walking into Center City, these huge anti-Met rallies that were, and he was, he was leading them, and he was cursing out the Mets and M. Donald Grant, and it was really something to see. But it was a lot of fun to watch all that back then.
McGraw was one character. He had that Eve thing going where he was basically mocking M. Donald Grant.
Yes.
Who came down to give some sort of a speech. The suits come down every now and again, and he just mocked them, and it became kind of their battle cry.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, that was in '73. And then they cleaned house, and it was horrible. So, first Seaver went, and Tug McGraw went for Stearns. So, you're still with me, right?
I still am.
All right. I got some buzzing going on. Yeah, good years for Philadelphia. They built some great teams at the expense of the Mets, who really lost their heart when Seaver and McGraw went, and that was bad. And I was an adult, and that was bad. The shock of losing, of when they traded Seaver was that was bad for Mets.
Oh, I remember that like it was yesterday. The Saturday Night Massacre.
And I remember the guys that they got. They were good ball players: Dougie Flynn, Steve Henderson. But just not. Pat Zachary was a pitcher that they got to. Just not. It just didn't do it.
No, and it was a pitiful time to be a Met fan. M. Donald Grant would be drunkenly staggering.
You mean the last 50 years, or you meant that? Those
oh no,
years?
that 1 year after Seaver was traded.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant thought you meant all of them. But no, it hasn't been all pitiful at all. But it hasn't been a bowl of cherries. I got to tell you.
No, and that year I remember 1977, M. Donald Grant staggering around Shea Stadium, and people were booing him, and he was I think just either drunk or depressed, and he would start yelling at the crowd, "What do you want from me? I gave you good baseball at an affordable price," and they were booing him, and they were throwing beer on him, and it was he thought he was doing the right thing by unloading high salaries, and Met fans didn't care about that. They wanted a winner.
Right, and it was changing times too. We're talking before free agency, and a lot of owners just in that sense. And it's not just that they wanted a winner. You don't trade the icon. You don't trade. I'm saying that would be like St. Louis trading the Musial or DiMaggio for Williams. All the crazy things that come to mind. but that wasn't good. I may have asked you this before, but I like to ask, what was your first baseball game, your first baseball experience?
I'll tell you the first one I remember. I was at a Yankee game in 1961. I remember very little of it, other than the fact that it was sitting in the bleachers and it was hot and I wanted to go home and I was, whining the whole time. But the first one that I went to that I enjoyed and remembered was in 1962 in the Polo Grounds, watching the Cincinnati Reds and the New York Mets. And that was the game which I think we've talked about in the past, where I was sitting there, and behind me, when I turned, there was a Army officer handcuffed to a sailor. And I said to my father, I said, Dad, there's an Army officer who's handcuffed to a sailor in back of us. Now, what they were doing in the Polo Grounds on a Sunday, I knew at age 6 that enlisted men and officers didn't fraternize, let alone across branches. And when I saw the handcuffs, I said, "This is amazing." The Army officer took the prize out of his Cracker Jack box and gave it to me. And he and the sailor got up and started running down towards the left field line in the Polo Grounds, and I thought, this is a very odd thing to be happening at a baseball game. But, and that was, and I remember it like it was yesterday, and I remember the game, and I remember the Polo Grounds was all spruced up and painted green, and the Mets had the blue and orange uniforms, and across the river you could see the top of Yankee Stadium, which was just kind of sitting there, sort of sticking its tongue out, at Greater Metdom. And and the flags around the scoreboard and the Rheingold sign, I remember all of that like it was yesterday.
How old were you?
I was 6.
Wow.
I was 6 years old.
It was your dad who took you?
Yeah. Yeah, and we came down the Major Deegan and over the McCombs Dam Bridge into Harlem.
I have to tell you, I still don't really this is the second time. I still don't fully understand the sailor handcuffed to the officer.
No, it was so weird. I don't know if they were doing experiments or something. It's just odd.
Huh.
It's just very, very odd.
That is, or maybe to get people's reaction, or I don't know. That may be something that you may have to die curious about. You can't Google that. You can't Google 1962 Mets game, sailor handcuffed, and have it come up like everything else we're used to doing nowadays. Tony, I enjoy your company. I enjoy chatting with you.
Same here.
I enjoy just talking ball with you and talking life with you. I hope you'll continue to be a guest and continue to be my godfather.
Anytime. And I congratulate you on your recent interviews that you've done with Carl Erskine and Ron Swoboda. They were really terrific.
Well, that's what I mean.
And Bobby
by
Brown.
Godfather. Got to have a good booker when it comes to stuff like that. But they were a joy to speak with. Carl Erskine, for instance, is a man approaching 90 years old. He's in his 90th year.
Yes.
He is as articulate and together, much more so than the host. That's for damn sure. I don't even remember who the co-host was. I'm not speaking for the co-host. I'm speaking for me. This guy had it together. He memory that wouldn't quit, and told some wonderful stories about the playing in the minors and having Jackie Robinson come over and encourage him. They played against the Dodgers. He's playing with Fort Worth, as a matter of fact.
Yes.
And he pitched a great game against the big club when they came through to Barnstorm or play an exhibition game. And it was like 1949, Jackie's third year. By that time, he's the leader of the Dodger clubhouse. Jackie Robinson is. And he took it upon himself to come over, cross the field, go to the dugout and say, I want to speak to Carl Erskine. And Carl Erskine comes out and he says, young man, I just want to tell you that you have the stuff that it takes to pitch in the big leagues, and you'll be there before long. Now, can you imagine what that meant to a minor leaguer and what have you? And how I got goosebumps listening to him tell the story. It was terrific. And not just Erskine, people I'm talking to almost on a daily basis that share memories with me that we get to see our common denominator of people, how baseball is a microcosm of life. And I love what I'm doing. I love the way I'm, spending my last years on Earth, or at least the last years that I'm cognizant enough to be able to read this. And that could have been less. They just didn't warn me. They just didn't come to me and say, it's over for you. But soon enough, don't worry. And I'll welcome the time, because you just got to go out with grace. And it's better than retiring and sitting there and watching the grass grow.
Well, that's just it. You could just pity yourself. And I had this discussion with my wife, Kathy, last night, thinking about Joe's passing and Ken Howard's passing, and I've had a few, over the course of time. And it's just, as time marches on. And I said, the best people I had, or the best people I knew of, you being a noted exception, are no longer here, and that's where it really starts to get heavy.
I'm on my way. I'm crossing. There's a line. Boom! I could be gone. So, and believe me, I'm not. I shouldn't be included. I'm just a regular guy. Absolutely, we are. How many music people and sports have we lost just this year? And it is March, for crying out loud. And for me, I really got a big hit the other day. Gary Shandling passed away. 1978, I'm living in Sacramento, and I had to make a decision whether I was going to be a comedian, at least try to be a comedian, or get into radio. That's what I want. I want to do either of the two. I didn't know what was best for me. I went to see Gary Shandling in a comedy club that I later played in when I did decide on doing comedy. And I chatted with him for a long time, because there weren't very many Jews in Sacramento at the time. And I found out that I could meet people, just with a little moxie. And I chatted with him about what he did. And I really got a feeling for comedy, and I got a feeling for the man. He was a very warm man. He changed the way my life went. I don't know how it would have gone the other way. I knew that radio would have been constricting in the traditional manner of FCC control, that type of thing. And as a comedian, you could produce and write your own shtick, and you're responsible for it, and there are no excuses. So when I rose to mediocrity, I could only blame myself, as opposed to, if I would have been this, if they would have hired me, blah, blah, blah. No, I just wasn't funny. It was just funny enough, let's put it that way. But that was cool, and it was a cool way to do. But Gary Shandling helped me make that decision. And his passing, he's young, much younger than me. He's 65. We say, I'm 69. He's 65. I mean, it's shocking, getting back to the people we lose. So
and this year we lost, one of my favorite DJs, Charlie Tuna, and he for many years in and around Los Angeles, KHJ, K-Earth 101, and and I, other than the times when I was in California, I'd hear him, on the East Coast in syndication, and I'm thinking, this is another person who leaves us. We're really the lost art of being a great radio DJ, goes with them, and there aren't any left. I mean, there may be a couple left on satellite, but it's just and today's radio, what passes for oldies radio or top 40 radio, is so disgusting, to the point where it's not even worth listening to, and it just made me very sad, Zig.
Well, we grew up in an era in New York where there were people like Gene Shepard, Long John Neville, Barry Gray. Barry Gray. It was just, you'd get talk that you couldn't get. I can remember being in high school and staying up all night with the transistor radio to Long John Neville, and his panel of guests. Kurt Vonnegut would be on.
Mm-hmm.
Just
WNBC,
a myriad of people talking interesting facts, and I learned much more from late night radio than I ever learned at Newtown High School, and that's just the way it was. We had great radio in those days, and I'm producing now my podcast network, which I hadn't been doing before, and a guest on my show from way back, a guy named Sam Zervitz, is doing a weekly podcast on my station. So I hope you'll look for Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, comfortablyzoneradio.com. He's Sam Zervitz. He does a weekly commentary of about an hour of his life experiences. 79-year-old educator who speaks eloquently, just incredible stories, and he just talks on many, many different topics. He picks a topic a week, and he just goes with it. And the reason I'm saying he so much reminds me of the radio we heard growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And he's kind of a cross between Shepard, who is you really can't compare anybody to Gene Shepard. He was terrific.
Yeah. And
Long John and Barry Gray is just a cross between all these guys, and he's really got it going. And some of it is sports. Very, very little of it is sports. His life experiences, and it's just tremendous. So. One of the people on my network that I'd like to advise anybody, and you especially, because you'd really enjoy listening to him. I get the privilege of producing the show. I'm not on it at all, but I get to do the technical stuff, so therefore I get to listen to him once a week. I listen to the whole show, and it's really terrific. So if you'll pick up on that, and my listening audience too, I want to advise you all that it's not just me rambling and baseball on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. It's some and there's other shows. We got a show on professional wrestling. It's called Durfcast. Fred Lazarus comes to mind.
Oh, that's a large part of my growing up is professional wrestling.
It just got a whole bunch of good stuff, and it just keeps me busy all day. That's all I can tell
you. Well, when you talk about great talk shows, Howard Cosell had a great talk show on WABC Radio Sunday nights, speaking of everything, and he'd have on guests from all walks of life. And
I know that. I had been gone from New York, and I know that one of the regrets that he had was not getting into the serious part of life, and he was known for all sports. I didn't know he did that, and I'll bet that influenced the type of show that you're doing.
Well, it showed me that you can have more than one dimension. And
right.
Howard, for all his imperfections, applied himself to a number of different things, and did well with them. And either loved.
At the very end, he was he really was a genius. Very eloquent. He became bitter Life will
did.
do that to you. He lost his wife, and I don't think who was his best friend, and I think that that contributed to it. Alcohol may have contributed to it. I'm not. He had an ego. Sometimes there are people with egos that just tend to fall. Their egos are just too big, and you see that politically. You see there's a lot of hypocrisy that has to go on to make it, whatever field you do, to make it to that heights, because you are controlled by sponsorship and this, that, and the other thing, and it takes its toll. But no question, Howard was a very, very bright man, a funny man too at times. And if nothing else, the most entertaining broadcaster that ever lived. People were buying bricks to throw at their TVs at one time.
Oh, for sure.
Remember that? And you must say, I mean, NBC gave him or Monday Night Football. Wow, just so there you go. Thanks for being on.
As always, thank you for having me.
Good. We'll talk again, and I'm grateful. Will you say hello to Bob for me when you see him next?
I will. I certainly will.
And I hope you'll come back together as a team next time.
Yeah, you tell us when. Always happy to be here. You know that.
That sounds great. Thank you. From Connecticut, Mr. D'Angelo, I am pleased to have you. I'm just going to end by telling everybody, whatever holiday you celebrate, enjoy. Make today Sunday and every other day a holiday, or whatever the hell I'm talking about. Just, you get rummy like that when you're having fun, talking to friends, talking ball, talking.
Yeah, you sound like Stengel. There comes a time in every man's life, and you've had plenty of them.
Right. I sound like Stengel. Scarily enough, I look like Stengel. Rest in peace, Charles Dillon. And you be well, Tony.
You too. Thanks, Zig. Take care.
Adios, everybody.
Bye now.